While I love all of the game loops of Star Citizen, apart from box delivery, mining is probably my jam. And in the upcoming patch 319, everything's getting turned on its head. Basically, forget nearly everything you knew about mining. Forget about your meta builds and, much to my sadness, throw my Quantanium mining guide in the bin. But before you go and melt your prospector, I want to go through some of the changes and the results of the testing that we've managed to do so far. I've spent a lot of time travelling across the system to gather all of the new statistics for mining lasers, consumables, modules and gadgets, and we've been theorising on the best loadouts for certain tasks, and we've had a chance to put some of it into practice and experiment within the PTU. But I do want to be clear from the outset that this is not a guide. It's basically the making of one. We'll need to do a whole lot more testing, exploring and experimentation, but there's one thing I can say for myself so far, and that's that mining is still incredibly fun, and in my opinion, just got a whole lot more engaging. So if all this sounds good to you, grab a cup of tea while I roll the intro, and then let's get into it. Hello and welcome back or welcome to the channel. I'm Loudguns and I got my start making SC content breaking down how to break down valuable rocks. So while nearly everything about mining is getting turned on its head, I'm actually pretty excited about these changes. The truth is that mining was getting a bit stale. Sure, it was one of the best and most consistent ways to make cash, but despite a wide range of rocks to go out and crack, a pretty narrow-edged mining meta had emerged with one or two hotspots and only one commodity worth mining, Quantanium. And due to that single focus, a single build emerged. The Lancet laser reigned supreme with its significant reductions to resistance and instability, and equipped with only a Surge and Stampede module, a solo miner could succeed in cracking any rock that Stanton had to throw at them. At the risk of foreshadowing, unless CIG have made a typo on the stats, the Lancet laser is dead, and the complexity and variation of mining is on the rise. And while it's too early to make a full guide, I want to use this video to recap the changes to mining, pass on some of the hard data that we've gathered, share some insights we've come up with based on it, and then look at the results of some early testing where we put things into practice. I'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone over at our org and community Frontier who's helped out with this, and if you'd like to get involved, there's a link to the Discord in the video description down below. And if for some reason a video as unapologetically nerdy as this, it's got spreadsheets and everything, gets you excited to try out SC, then you'll also find my referral down there too and on screen now. Just be sure to use some ones when you create an account for some cash towards your first mining laser. But seriously, if you've got a mate who plays already, just ask them for theirs. So to get us started, let's take a look at the changes to mining coming in 319. Fair warning, it's a lot. And if you're really interested, I can highly recommend watching the ISC episode on mining and last Friday's Star Citizen Live. In that, you'll get to hear directly from the game designers responsible for these changes. And I'm not going to touch on every single change, and I'm focusing on the really important stuff for ship mining. I'm sure at a later date I'll dive into the caves with Starstreams in search of the new hand-mineable Janolite, but for now my focus is on the changes affecting the ships like the Prospectors and the Moles. And first up is the geographical distribution and rarity of commodities. Commodities can now be split into 4 categories: standard materials such as iron and copper, common materials, uncommon materials, and one rare material, Quantanium. Different mats are going to have a higher probability to spawn in certain locations. And while this is important for miners, we're going to have to unleash a massive survey in 319 to work out spawn rates in different locales. It's also a big deal for traders, with prices of certain goods higher where they're less common. And this can lead to an arbitrage opportunity and really sets us up quite well for when we move from just Stanton to Stanton and Pyro. This is very rough, and obviously, as with everything in this video, could be updated further in the live environment, but my friend Blunder, one of the senior industrialists at Frontier, quickly thought to pass the information at the TDDs for potential clues as to likely spawn patterns. Nothing here should be taken as gospel, but if I were a betting man, I'd probably start my search for Quantanium on ArcCorp's moons. I'd say that Taranite might be more likely to spawn on Microtech or its moons, and gold and Bexalite could be more abundant around Crusader. There were also some interesting hints in the SC Live episode that there could be more to it than simply which planetary system you're in. So when we're out surveying for rocks, I'm keen to keep a note of the type of terrain we find it in. Is it mountainous or flat? Are we close to existing mining facilities or far away from them? These are the sorts of questions I think we should be asking. Another thing that you're going to notice really quickly in 3.19 is that rock mass has also completely changed. Previously, all asteroids were in a range of 4.7k to 5.3k mass, while all surface deposits range from about 2.5k to 8.5k mass. And while the deposits haven't meaningfully changed in their size, their masses are now wildly different, as each underlying commodity has its own density figure, which affects the mass of the overall rock. Deposits can now vary from mere hundreds, with some pieces being possible to simply scoop up in a prospector without any need for fracturing, to tens of thousands of mass. The highest mass figure I found personally was a Quantanium rock at 70k on Lyria. I've heard reports of deposits running up towards 100k mass. It's important to remember as well that these mass changes are affecting both asteroids and planetary surface deposits. One of the things we're currently measuring is the mass to SCU ratio for each commodity type. We're doing this by cataloguing any instances of 100% pieces of a certain commodity that we find, then measuring the amount that we're able to extract. The translation here isn't perfect, but each commodity seems to be forming into a narrow band, so I'm hoping that we can use this data to estimate SCU and build mining calculators in the future. And also, while we don't have anywhere near enough data to confirm it just yet, there's certainly an unsurprising trend forming where the higher value materials have a higher density and therefore require greater energy input to crack. Helpfully, amidst all this confusing new data, CRG have updated the mining HUD to include a guide as to whether or not your current build is enough to crack the stone you're looking at. It gives you a difficulty rating here from easy to impossible. Apparently, impossible means impossible, which I can believe to some extent, although I note that it doesn't update based on you hitting a rock with your friends, so technically I have already cracked a rock rated as impossible and fulfilled my pledge to Thorsten in an earlier video. For solo players though, this rating system should provide a really good guide as to whether you should try your luck or move on to find something more manageable. Or, you know, call in a friend. Not only have the rocks changed, but there's also been a complete overhaul to the statistics behind every mining laser, module, consumable and gadget. I spent an entire evening trucking around Stanton in my Cutty Black and stopping off at every refinery to build up a data set on all of these. Fair warning as before though, we're still in PTU and I've been burned before by stats that change ahead of live. Down in the vid description there'll be links to all of these datasheets and hopefully in the not too distant future these will be up on our new website. Check there to just make sure that nothing's changed too much. But for now let's start by looking at the mining lasers. So straight off the bat, one thing to highlight is that there are now real differences between the size 1 variants that fit the Prospector and the size 2s that go on the multi-crew Argo Mole. Size 2 lasers deliver greater power, have longer range, and have increased module slots for mods and consumables. Unlike in prior builds where the Arbor laser had 1 mod slot and all other lasers had 3, there's now a lot more variation in the amount of slots available, so this can make quite a big difference. And something else you'll notice is that lasers now have minimum power as well as maximum power. And this is almost certainly a direct rebalancing of the support laser technique, where a buddy could apply the laser at 0 power, and you would benefit from all of their buffs, even on a small piece of rock. Now if you want those buffs, they'll have to commit to assisting you while adding energy to the rock, and you'll need to control that. This change also means that some lasers, such as Hofstede's, may be more suitable for making precision breaks of smaller pieces than a higher powered laser such as the Helix. And before we get too deep into the weeds of the other stats, I'd like to just segue a little bit to talk about how I view these modifiers and why I think looking at the raw data can really help you when trying to work out optimal mining builds. So I separate them into 2 camps, key stats and noisy stats. Key stats are the ones that I think are actually important, and these include laser power, laser instability, resistance, optimal charge window size, and the new cluster modifier. So whether or not your current setup can crack a rock largely depends on a combination of its mass, its resistance, and how much juice you're able to put into it. The ease of doing it is then going to be affected by the instability, the volatility of the power stream you've got going into the rock. High instability can make it hard to keep the charge going into the green zone and makes you run the risk of slipping into the red and catastrophically overcharging the rock. So you've really got two ways to combat this. Reduce the instability via negative instability modifiers, or increase the size of the green zone or optimal charge window. And finally here, space on board either a mole or a prospector is finite, so one of the golden rules of ship mining in SC is to fill up as much of your saddlebags with figurative or literal gold, and as little crap as you can. A positive cluster modifier makes the rocks more likely to fragment into high percentage pieces of a single commodity after a break. Now the noisy stats are the ones that I don't care about so much, and I try not to get too excited about big positive impacts on them, and I'm willing to overlook debuffs on them if the trade-off is buffs of the key stats. My noisy stats include extraction laser power, optimal charge window rate, catastrophic rate, shatter damage, and inert reduction. Extraction laser power determines how quickly you hoover up rocks once they're broken down, but it doesn't actually help in actually breaking the rock to begin with. I can live with being a bit slower on the scoop, basically. The optimal charge window rate is just how quickly the green zone will charge. Again, it's more important to me that I can charge the rock to the green zone and hold the charge level consistently within it, even if it then takes a bit longer to cook. Catastrophic charge rate and shatter damage fall under a, and I hate this phrase, skill issue column. If you're looking to get good at mining, you need to learn to avoid the red zone, and you need to have a bit of patience. If you clip into the red, just dial back, let the rock cool down and come back once it's cold. Reductions to the rate of red zone charge and the potential damage you could receive from overcooking a rock are just a bit of a crutch really. And finally, given what I said about avoiding the crap, inert material reduction might sound like an odd one to consider a noisy stat. However, by default, all of the lasers, both size 1 and size 2, have significant inert material reduction at 30 to 40%. Giving up good stats for anything more would be pretty much wasteful, particularly considering rocks in 319 are more likely to contain fairly low levels of pure inert materials and higher amounts of low-value commodities like aluminium or quartz. Inert material reduction won't actually screen these out. So with all that said, just a few things to pick out on each laser here. The first one, the Arbor, is the stock laser that comes attached to prospectors and moles, and it's actually quite good now. It's particularly maybe a beginner's laser. Given its relatively low power and the 25% increased resistance, it's not going to crack every rock, but it does give you a really good buff of minus 35% to instability and increases the optimal charge window by 40%, which is a pretty big bonus. The Helix is still the king of power, which for some of the very large high density rocks is going to be an absolute must. This combines very well with its minus 30% modifier to resistance. However, it does crush the optimal charge window by 40%, and it has a very high minimum power, making it a tricky laser to operate on small pieces. It also has amongst the shortest of ranges. So I think the Helix might be best as maybe a multi-crew laser, adding support in its stats to other lasers. The Hofstede is a really interesting one, able to bring a chunk of additional power versus an Arbor, alongside the handy reduction in resistance of 30%. It also adds another 20% bonus to the green zone as well. Its downside here is a 10% increase in instability though. The more I look at it, the more I think the impact is basically an advanced Arbor laser, and it's one I'd encourage slightly more experienced prospector pilots to take a good look at. You get more power, you've got 2 or 3 module slots depending on what size you're looking at, a 10% bonus to instability, and that's offset by only 10% added to resistance and a 20% buff to optimal charge window size. The impact won't hold your hand as much as the Arbor, but all in all it will let you tackle higher mass rocks. The Klein is maybe a bit of a specialty laser, which I believe will have a place in assisting in big breaks of high density rocks. You're making a big sacrifice to instability at plus 35%, which might make it a bit tricky to handle small precision breaks with. But the 45% cut to resistance is the largest out of any of the lasers, and 20% widening of the optimal charge window is pretty good as well. It does suffer from the worst module slot stats though, with 0 on offer for a size 1 on a prospector, and only the 1 on the size 2. And last, and unfortunately least, we've got the Lancet. Honestly, unless I'm missing something very important here, I'm tempted to think this is a bit of a joke by the devs, and having seen us use nothing but Lancets and the occasional Helix for the last few years, they want us to throw the things away. Buffs of minus 10% to laser instability and 40% to the noisy optimal charge rate stat are simply not worth crushing your optimal charge window by 60% for. Next up, we've got the modules, so these fit into your laser's mod slots and add further modifiers to your stats. They come in 2 varieties, permanent mods which are just always on and apply a passive stat modifier, and consumables which cost less but have a finite number of charges. For consumables, the stats apply for a time duration after you activate them. Because of their throwaway nature, consumable modules tend to have less of a trade-off in terms of stats. A large part of their trade-off is that they're time limited. However, there are some that I personally discount a bit due to their focus on noisy stats. For example, the optimum module's minus 80% on catastrophic charge rate seems spicy until I remember I don't care very much about this stat. Meanwhile, its 10% reduction in instability doesn't seem worth the 15% reduction to laser power, so I for the most part dismissed that. Still, if you've got a mate who's pretty trigger happy and always getting you into the red zone, it might be just the ticket you're after. Ones that I would highlight here are lifelines, which offer a nice 20% drop in insta and 15% drop in resistance for a duration of 15 seconds. And the 60% increase in cat charge rate is less meaningful, just don't go into the red basically. Stampedes, which now give a 10% drop in instability and an accompanying bump of 35% laser power for 30 seconds, are also nice if you need a bit of a boost. And another one to call out is the new Surge, which, instead of dumping a flat amount of charge into a rock, now boosts your laser power by 50% while lowering resistance by 15%. This might seem rubbish compared to old Surge, but effectively does the job that Surge was meant to do, speeding up the time it takes to reach the green zone and start cracking. This change does cut out the double Surge exploit that we used to use to land in the green zone of big rocks that were theoretically too large to break solo. I will miss the thrill of Surge Stampede, but sometimes good things must pass, and I can totally understand why they've made this change. But while the consumables contain some interesting possibilities, I think it's the permanent modules that are more exciting. These are always on when you attach them, so they provide you with a constant modifier to your stats. The prices might be a bit eye-watering, but the real value is in the tier 3 versions of each module, and it's at this level where the buffs really start to outpace the debuff trade-offs, so I generally focus on this tier for builds. Of particular interest to me, and purely in alphabetical order, are the Focus 3, which gives a huge 40% boost to the optimal charge window at only a 5% cost to laser power, the Riga C3, which gives a 25% increase in laser power for only a 1% cost to the green zone, and the XTR XL, which gives a 25% boost to the optimal charge window alongside a 6% fall in inert mats. And that's only at a debuff of extraction laser power. And last but definitely not least of the mining gear, we've got the until now heavily overlooked mining gadgets. These pieces of kit require you to land and hop out of your ship, attach them to a rock and calibrate them, and once calibrated and activated, they'll apply further modifiers to the rock, hopefully giving you a further helping hand. My advice is to stop overlooking gadgets. They add time to a run, but they also have some very interesting stats to apply. And one thing I'd point out is that they're the only way currently to apply the new cluster modifier, increasing the chances of the materials you want breaking off cleanly. In prior versions of the game, some funny moments were had stacking multiple gadgets onto a single rock and stacking buffs upon buffs upon buffs, but now you can only choose one or risk a big explosion apparently, so you've got to choose wisely here. Ore maxes and wave shifts offer some meaningful reductions in instability, but from what I've seen from our limited testing so far, getting enough charge into some of the most valuable high density rocks is the main issue. So for me, the Optimax could be an essential addition to the toolkit here. We can find other ways to offset its 30% green zone reduction, but there aren't many other routes to dropping resistance by 30%, and the 60% cluster modifier is the largest one available. And finally on the list of important changes that I'll cover here, we've got the updates to multiplayer mining. The short version is that multi-crew mining in the mole is getting a buff, while multiplayer mining in multiple prospectors is getting a debuff. Essentially, if you apply multiple lasers from the same mole onto a rock, you suffer no debilitating effects. The retconned law reason being that the mole's computer calibrates the lasers to work together perfectly. However, if you add a laser from another ship, you're going to double the instability. So therefore 3 prospectors working on the same rock would effectively have to deal with quadruple the instability, while 3 lasers working in concert from a mole will suffer no such issue. This, along with the increased power and higher gadget slots of size 2 mole lasers, gives 3 or 4 people working together on a mole a much better chance of cracking some of the hardest rocks than the same people each taking their own prospector out. So while I tried to add in a few of my own thoughts and experiences as we went through, I'd like to dedicate this section to asking what all these changes mean for miners. What's life as a rock hopper going to look like in 3.19 and beyond, and how will the mining game change? First, given what I just covered on multiplayer mining, I want to address the question, is multi-prospector mining dead? Because certainly in some discussions I've had in Discord, this has come up as quite a big issue. A lot of people love buddying up to search for rocks in their prospectors and vastly prefer them to the mole, and I really do honestly get this. My simple answer though would be no. You're mostly concerned about making the first break, so 2 prospectors will still do the job of injecting twice as much power into the rock. You can still work with your friend to combine different laser types to gain complementary benefits. You just have to figure out a way to offset that instability. Particularly the more friends that you call in, this will become a bigger issue. But keep in mind that you've got a variety of lasers, modules and gadgets that offer exactly this instability buff, and just plan accordingly. In order to get enough power into this juicy gold rock that we found, we had to call in 2 prospectors to assist our fully lasered mole. But thanks to all of our combined buffs, the added instability was just a non-issue. Also, I'm just saying, you can do some pretty hilarious things with module combos now, including completely eliminating the red zone. Failure is literally not an option. So next up, and a logical follow-on is solo mining dead now? Again, quite simply, nope. Solo miners now just can't go for every single rock in the game. There are some rocks that, if you want to crack them, are locked behind multiplayer gameplay. I've only been out for a limited time, but honestly in that time I found plenty of decent rocks that I was able to crack alone in a prospector. Certainly enough that I'm convinced solo miners will be able to turn out a good profit that leaves solo mining in a comparable place to other solo professions. But what might happen is that you might find certain incredibly high value rocks that are just beyond your ability to solo. And then it's your choice really. Accept that you can't do it and move on to find something that you can, or call in some help and work with other people to slice and dice that giant pile of cash. Now this is the big one. Is quant mining dead? Or have CIG, by apparently dialing the price of Quantanium up even further, left the quant mining meta alive and well in 3.19? Well, on this one so far, I think the answer is yes. The key thing is rarity, with Quantanium spawns being far fewer and further between. Now Q-type rocks can even contain no Quantanium, and in my hours of searching I found exactly 1 high percentage Quantanium deposit. I believe that this rarity factor will make searching exclusively for Quantanium a poor strategy. And some people might be easily distracted by the fact that quant prices in Blunder's pricing list are now much higher at 27.5k per SEU. However, this could mean that you miss that Bexalite, Tarolite and Gold are all offering prices per SEU that are not too much lower than quant prices at pre-3.19. Add in the benefit here that these materials don't come with the explosive timer of Quantanium, and you can imagine that the mining game will somewhat change to include a greater number of viable materials. And I can see the objective of a mining run being bring home a bag as close to full as possible with these materials. Now that could mean the mining run itself is longer, with more time spent out in the field and fewer trips back to the refinery. But at the same time it means you're more likely to bring home a large cash crop each time. And again, maybe this is another stealth buff to the mole with its 96 SCU of cargo. Historically in 3.18 and prior, you'd often come home with only a half full mole because the volatile cargo warning was getting mad at you. Part of why multi-prospector mining was considered superior was that you were often wasting the space in your mole, because it was better to come home with 40 or 50 SCU of quant than risk staying out in the field looking to fill up the rest. However, in the new world, you'll be looking to bring home full bags. That being said, if you did get lucky and come across a viable quantanium deposit, that could be your bumper payday, making it worthwhile just dropping everything, focusing on getting that rock split, and cutting the run short to head back home. And for me personally, this is one of the things that makes 3.19's mining changes actually really exciting. The fun part of mining is, unsurprisingly, actually mining. It's cracking rocks with or without your mates, while exploring some of the frontier moons and planets. It's not sitting in quantum travel back and forth to the refinery, seeking out one specific thing and ignoring everything else, and performing one break and scoop in between times. I've also heard a few comments that CIG have missed the mark when it comes to the bulk commodities such as iron, copper, aluminium, quartz and tungsten. Yes, we have more possible things worth mining at the high end, but with prices in the mere hundreds per SCU of these materials, there still really isn't going to be any incentive to mine them. Even newer miners who want to practice on slightly easier materials can choose some of the commodities such as laranite or hephaestonite that offer better returns while being a bit easier to control. But while I think this is true, I do think it's important to remember the ships that we have and the ones that we don't. Prospectors and moles are both relatively small precision mining vehicles. They've got big benefits like being able to enter the atmosphere and be crewed by small amounts of people, but they've also got downsides and like their very small cargo capacities. The commodities and minables that we have in SC also need to make sense when larger mining vessels like the Orion are added, and potentially we might see a ship that also focuses on quantity over quality in the form of the large mining ship from RSI that was teased at SitCon. So for now, the Prospector and the Mole are the opposite end of the spectrum. They're quality over quantity, and that does mean that you're meant to be sorting the wheat from the chaff. So I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you a bit more clarity and guidance to help you get ready for mining in 3.19. If you found it useful and you think I've earned it, then please do consider leaving me a like and a subscribe. I still find it pretty mad that a guy as nerdy as me has carved out a bit of a niche in making content like this for fellow nerds. I'll be making a full guide for mining in 3.19 to replace the soon-to-be retired Quant Miners guide, but it's going to take time and proper research. I could rush it out now and tell you that my preferred Prospector build is an Impact 1 laser with an XTR XL, a Riga C3 and a backpack full of Optimax gadgets. Well, okay, I guess I kinda just did, but it wouldn't be a good guide. Instead, I'm going to go away, put my head together with some of the amazing miners at Frontier, do the work, getting out and testing, and then I'll try and come up with a complete guide. In the meantime, I'm keen to, like in this video, share what we know when we know it, helping more people to get into what looks like an increasingly complex but an increasingly rewarding game loop. So with all that said, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I look forward to seeing you next time.